They're
The
elected by
laws
the
are
voters.
written by the legislature.
Yeah, okay.
It's
So
the opposite,
can I
Jason.
get in there?
Yeah, you will after me, Anson.
Well, no, you would need a majority to be that concerned about those laws that they would vote someone out for.
Correct. On the books.
Right.
Guys,
And there are many other
They were
things.
vehement
And
racists.
there are many other
Let's think it
things
through.
that people are concerned about from time, and that's why.
It was Plessy versus Ferguson. There was this.
No, we know that. We were before that. Hampton, let's think it through. You have a racist community, which is majority racist, and they're voting in racist lawmakers, and they're doing it for multiple reasons, not just simply for this one. In order to break that system politically, you have to have a politician come up and be bold and say, I am going to undo these laws that have been part of our culture. It's very difficult. Or
like LBJ.
Okay. Or if you have no laws, I own a restaurant. All I have to do is me myself say I prefer money over racism and allow everyone to come shopping with me. No bureaucracy, no changing over systems, no waiting for an election, no convincing people. I just want money, and that will change the system. So it's much faster, it's much cleaner, and it happens much better. That's why you're trying to create it. Yes, they were. I'm not trying to pretend that the antebellum South wasn't racist. They were fully racist. But the reason why they needed to legislate Jim Crow, because the business owners would not have done it without legislation.
Okay, let me just say this real quick. I don't know if you remember Cardano, the Nazi that was on this app. I don't know if you remember him. He explicitly said that he would rather have a poor nation that was white than a rich nation that was diverse.
Okay, he's one guy.
Literally said that, but that's what a lot of racists.
So I want to address you, Ham.
I agree, but I'm talking about the business owners that actually want to make money.
Meyer, let me jump in with a different. Meyer, let me jump.
I'm in line. About him.
Meyer and Hampton, I want to jump in for a second. Am I audible? Hang on. I have another idea that I just want to add into the conversation, but keep the conversation. So I think the politicians who pass these racist laws are deliberately and cynically and evilly exploiting human prejudice. Like, everybody is a little bit sort of uncertain about people who look differently than them, or worship differently than them, or eat differently than them, or they come from a different country. So these politicians use a very negative, fear-based platform in order to gain power, exploiting people's prejudices.
Yeah, their nature.
What is whose nature? The people or the politicians?
Human nature.
Or both?
They're exploiting human nature.
Yes, in an evil way. So it's not unlike, for example, what was the name of was it Willie Horton? The very Lee Atwater, I think it was with Ronald Reagan. Lee Atwater was a famous political consultant, and he devised ads for Ronald Reagan about this guy that was released from prison and went on to kill others. And this was an argument against liberalism. And needless to say, it was a black guy that they used to exploit people's prejudices. So this is something that we have little control over, the cynical use of fear and prejudice in order to gain political power. And I'm going to tell you, I definitely think that right now, my party, our party, the Democratic Party, is using fear and prejudice in order to gain political power, to distract us from. Yes, I think our party is doing that.
Wow.
Is that Hampton?
Yes.
Yeah, they're going Trump. Like, why did Nancy Pelosi?
He's the leader of the party.
Yeah, but what is there to be? But they're using fear, like
mass deportation of people, calling them rapists, talking about crime and shit, demonizing immigrants, demonizing this. What are you? Democrats.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, I'm not going to deny that.
Not a whole squad of people.
All right, I'm not going to argue against what you're saying.
What about basket of deplorables, hate democracy, MAGA?
Right. So let's say both sides are doing it.
I agree with Hillary.
I'm willing to say both sides.
Why are we talking about normal? Why are we talking about
about some old shit. Okay, and to Mira's point, he's absolutely right. Basket of deplorables. She's the one that said the election was rigged first. Let's stop talking about. No, but Hampton, we need to stop talking about some old shit.
I'll stop. But like,
okay.
tell Normo, the thing is, you're right. They're playing upon humans' natures, right? That's why you need laws, because humans don't have a good nature. I don't have a positive view of human nature. Call me a pessimist. Call me.
Well, we have a mixed human nature. It's good and bad.
So this
bad
is
outweighs
really, so Hampton, this is really the core of why you and I differ on how government should be run. I distrust government much more than I distrust my neighbor. And the reason I distrust government is because government, the first thing they will do is try to keep themselves in power. And it's slow on purpose. And they will enact laws that help them and help their constituents. And it's whoever is the swing vote, not necessarily the majority. And it's not a good way to change society. But if you have greedy, ugly capitalists that just want to make money, diversity will follow because they will hire the best programmer. That famous woman in NASA that was doing calculations in the basement and they couldn't admit that they hired a black woman, that wouldn't happen in a private corporation because they want to make money. They would hire that woman, they would pay her what she asked for because they want to make sure that they're only the government.
Yeah, sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. Humanity is not that good.
So what I was
saying the opposite. I'm saying I'm using.
I have to go in a second here, and I just want to say, I want you guys to consider that neither one of these possibilities is really right or informative. Very few countries have become diverse in the way that the United States has, or integrated, without some kind of push. But on the other hand, without some kind of push to be segregated, there was a natural tendency, even in the South, for things to become more integrated. Meyer is right that the tendency is there, and that a person who wants to run a better bricklaying operation is going to try to hire the best bricklayers, and the one who hires the good black bricklayer is going to do better than the one that doesn't, and somebody figures that out and they do it. Yeah, and so both of these things are unfortunately true at the same time.
So I want to address the jealousy's previous question to Meyer, that the legislation, how they voted the Jim Crow law into legislation. But the thing is, that is not you're basically trying to use that to refute Meyer's argument that the market process is better. But this legislation process is not a market process. Not all, actually, very few legislative processes is a market action. This government action, government function is to protect private property rights, and other than that, it should not interfere. And so this voting into law, they should not have voted in the first place. If we are operating on the principle of free market capitalism, so the government should not have the right to have that put into vote. That's the point.
That's an interesting point.
Sorry?
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, so you should not have the government should not have the right to interfere in how people operate their private properties. So that is voting into the Jim Crow law into action is the government's interference into in the free market. So it's not the free market. It's not the consequence of free market that the Jim Crow law voted into law. It's the complete opposite. And then also the other point is that for the Rosa Parks, the demonstration or this movement is actually supported and financed by railway companies because they want the black to ride in the same compartment as the whites, and they want to overturn the law, and so they financed the Rosa Parks movement. So that's the free market capitalism in action.
Thank you, Anson. I agree. And Hampton, just to be clear, I am not saying that humans are perfect, and if we just leave them alone, everyone will hug each other and sing kumbaya. I am saying that if you exploit the most negative tendencies of people, of greed and personal gain, and you allow that to run rampant, it will lead to more inclusivity. And if you leave it up to the government, it would lead to whoever can manipulate the government in the manner that they manage to get their people in place and hold on to their monopolies.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive, though. I feel like you can do both. Like, you just need certain guide rails in order for people to be greedy and selfish, but you can't be greedy and selfish in these ways, or you have to play within these rules. You get what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean, and I think the last 50 years has proven you're right. I'm just saying it's not my first reaction, and the more power you give the government, the more power can be corrupted. So, I mean, I have to admit that since 1964, America has grown. So obviously it's working, and America has gotten a lot better until recently. But I don't. That doesn't mean you just add legislation on legislation.
Yeah, that is not the optimal process. The optimal process is let the free market reign.
But that's a slower process, and like these are real people's lives.
What are you talking about? Slow process? It's a fast
If we didn't
process.
pass this, what do you think would happen if we didn't pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
Because
do you think
it
there was
would
going to be
have-
some
Let's go
The
back.
Jim
What would have
Crow, like I
happened
said
if we
before,
wanted to pass
The
Jim
Jim
Crow?
Crow law wouldn't have been being a law.
I
in
don't
the
know
first
anything
place.
about
The government
really. I don't know about laws.
didn't have the power to
I'm not familiar with that
intervene,
part of history.
right? It wouldn't be in the first. It wouldn't be there in the first place.
Look, I don't know. I just, like I said, sometimes you need guardrails. That's just my.
What do you mean
personal
guardrail?
philosophy.
You saying
government
you think
regulation.
Jim Crow law is a guardrail?
No, he's saying Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, I
Rights
know.
Act,
But
things
the
of
thing
that
is,
nature.
it's like the government's first be an arsonist, set the fire, and then you put out the fire. The government is always doing that, and that's a better case when they actually realize to put out the fire. In many cases, they don't. They set the fire and let it burn.
Jim Crow laws were state laws; they were not federal laws. The federal government came in.
Nobody said they were federal laws.
The federal government came in and prevented localities from doing what they wanted.
Nobody said they were federal laws.
Jim Crow laws were a failure of the federal government to step in and protect people's inalienable rights.
It was an evolution.
Having the federal government step in, is what allowed Jim Crow to be.
That's actually not true. The federal government actually encouraged and allowed Jim Crow up until it didn't. Into a court case that it ruled that they never should have allowed it to happen in the first place. Jim Crow was just as much a failure of the federal government until it was no longer a failure of the federal government. I mean, the federal bargain to end the reconstitution and allow the Democrats to enact Jim Crow was a failure of the federal government. So we're being honest.
The federal
government is your buying.
Jim Crow was the federal government not stepping in and states making their laws. That's what it was.
Reconstruction
First of all,
working until
Yes,
the federal government
Reconstruction was the federal government abstaining from intervening in what states wanted to do. It was
the states,
federal government. It was the federal government agreeing to allow states' rights to happen. That's what it was.
Have the power to enact that kind.
Hang on, we're going to do this one at a time. If you want to make your case, Isaiah, go ahead, and then Mayor, and then Hanson, please.
Jim Crow was the federal government abstaining from interfering in states' rights and allowing the states to do what they wanted, which was disenfranchise their black populations. That went on for the better part of 100 years after the Civil War. Right, there was this short period of Reconstruction, and then once you get to like the 1880s, they just kind of like gave that shit up.
We don't need the timeline. Okay, Mayor, what did you want to say to that?
Allowing Jim Crow and then breaking Jim Crow was a failure of the federal government as much as a failure of the state governments. This is a biased opinion trying to say federal government is always right, but that's clearly not true. The federal government made the 3/5 law. The federal government did not enact the tenets of the Constitution until the Civil War. The federal government violated the 14th Amendment until Brown first Board of Education. So there was a failure throughout the governments, and then they got rectified. This is simply an idea to say that if we have top-down control, somehow everything will be better. That's not true.
The 3/5 compromise
All right,
was
that's
passed.
my turn. All right, so
Oh.
that's my turn now. So on top of what Maya said, the more important thing is the government, whether it's federal or state, should not have it's overstepping their power, and they should not have whether it's state or federal, it doesn't matter. They should not have the power to enact that kind of law in the first place. That's it.
Are you an anarchist?
Not an anarchist.
He's not an anarchist. No, he's not an anarchist. He just wants to enact the Constitution as it's written.
The power of the government should be limited to protecting private property rights and keep the sanctity of contracts.
The history of the United States is one in which blacks' rights were never, ever, ever at any point protected by state governments in which they were large members of the state, right? Their rights have only ever been protected by the federal government, which is why in the case of the federal government's intervention is better than leaving it up to the states, period.
Well, what about when the states, like in the North, outlawed slavery? In those cases, the states were protecting black people's rights.
There weren't very many. I was very clear where there were large numbers of black people. The North did not have very large numbers of black people.
Right. Now you're just sort of changing the
I said that initially.
Wait, okay. It is true that the reason why the antebellum South did not perpetually stay in its restrictive and oppressive is because it was part of a federal system. But to take that and say, therefore, there should be federal system only is making the mistake that it happens to be that the antebellum South got broken by the northern states, because it's all states. It happens to be a central government, but it's states voting, senators voting coming from states, were able to break that exclusive institution. If we would have had only one government, it's highly likely that would have been a confederacy, and we would have stayed within this exclusion. So the reason why we need multiple states is so we have multiple senators, and usually that turns out to give more rights to everybody because it's in everybody's selfish interest to make sure everyone has an equal playing field. So you're coming and saying the federal government protected black rights in the South, while true, is not an argument of an exclusive federal government.
There is no history of the states protecting the rights of black people in the United States.
Sure there is.
Yes, except in the North.
Sure there is.
Except in fully half the states in the North.
The North didn't protect black people's rights either when the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted. When the Fugitive
slavery.
Let me finish, El Norma.
That's protection.
When the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted, your neighbors in the North would allow you to be taken to the South, whether you were a slave previously escaped or not. They would not intervene on your behalf.
What about all the northern states that went to war over slavery? What about
They didn't go to war over slavery.
Okay, you spoke. What about all the northern state senators that voted for the 13th Amendment and 14th and 15th Amendments? The point is, you're saying that the southern states, which had majority black, did not protect their black citizens. That's true. And that was a failure. And the federal government went in and out of failures as well. But the reason the system worked was because you had senators from the North fighting for inclusivity, mostly for selfish reasons of wanting to be able to buy their cotton from the South without worrying about the slaves. So your point here is, no, it's not. Your point here is, what you're doing is a very bad analysis. You're saying the federal government protected black rights. True. The federal government, meaning senators from multiple areas, came together and protected everybody's rights. That is an argument for federalism. That's why we should have multiple states. Because if we have one, all you need is a capture of one, like Jim Crow did in the southern states, and there your rights are just gone right out the window. What we have now is, even though the Democrats are completely stripping our rights step by step, we have red states that are protecting our rights. That's why we should have many states.
This is false. The Civil War did not, you should just read a little Civil War history. The Civil War was not fought by Northerners. The Civil War was not fought by Northerners because of slavery. In fact, there was a massive draft riot in New York City when the draft started happening, where Irish people were lynching black people and killing them when they were drafted for the Civil War. Biggest race riot in New York City's history, right? If you listen to
Okay.
If you listen to Abraham Lincoln,
hang on for a reason, Isaiah. We have this problem with you. I have this problem with you all the time. It's a gish gallop. It's bad faith arguing. Okay, to make the case that the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery is just delusional. And
for the North wasn't.
It's bad. It's bad. You're not going to talk over me. It's bad faith arguing. So, hundreds of thousands of people died, and the issue was the expansion of slavery. Now, yes, the South seceded, and the North was fighting to keep them in the Union. Absolutely. But the South seceded because it wanted to retain slavery. So the idea that we weren't fighting over slavery it's bad faith arguing. And I don't think there's any need for it.
And if your proof is that people said, let's not go to war and let the wayward sister go if they want their slaves, basically saying, I am not going to save black people, and then killing black neighbors because they didn't want to go to war to save black people in the South, is actually proving my point. I never said every single person in the North was virtual and perfect. I said it was definitely a war over slavery. It was definitely a war over states' rights. And people did not want to go to war, showed that by killing their black neighbors. But my bigger point, which you keep trying to ignore, is the reason why the South did not become an exclusive hellhole like some other countries have done is because they were part of a federalist system. So it happens to be that those local states were pressuring their people, and the federal government is just a bunch of states. So trying to segregate the two and say states have never is ridiculous. The state senators from New York are the people. And remember, they weren't even voted by the people back then. They were voted by the state. That means the states sent delegates to Washington and freed slavery and acted the 14th Amendment. And then Reconstitution, they made a terrible bargain, and it lasted another 100 years. And then it was the state senators that voted for the Civil Rights of 1964. And that only happens with a multi-system of everyone working together. Or else all the racist needs to do is capture the central, and they have it forever, and you have no way out.
Okay, I invited Fugga back up on the stage.
Initiate the Civil War. The South did when they fired on Fort Sumter. The South was fighting for slavery, for sure, right? The South fired the first shot at Fort Sumter. And they made clear in the Cornerstone speech, as well as the Articles of Confederation, what they were fighting for. They were fighting for slavery. The North was fighting to keep the Union together, and the war was not initiated by them, right? So, no, Lincoln was very clear that if he could preserve the Union and keep slavery going, he would have done that. That's what he said.
Now we're going to focus on this because it's very difficult. Hang on.
It's very clear that is not.
Hang on 1 second. So this is yet another false argument. So, and I'm surprised that people try to make this argument, especially about somebody like Abraham Lincoln, who it should be recalled, should be noted. He was literally known as the Great Emancipator. And there's a reason why he was known as the Great Emancipator, is because he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a step forward in human history. Abraham Lincoln campaigned against slavery as a candidate. He governed as an opponent of slavery as a president. And he was murdered as an opponent of slavery by a pro-slavery racist psycho named John Wilkes Booth. So to cherry pick like one line from a speech, or not even a line, like a phrase from a speech, is bad faith arguing, and it's a lack of intellectual rigor and a lack of intellectual honesty.
Well,
and I hear this
worse
stuff.
than that, Norman, because his argument that it wasn't fought over slavery was that the South fired the first shot to break away to keep their slaves. Think that through. I mean, they could not keep their slaves had they stayed. And then the North came and said, you will stay with us and you will get rid of your slaves. I mean, there's no other way to frame this war besides slavery. What the North could have done is said, keep your slaves. Don't kill us, just keep your slaves. The North, it may have been in the Senate floor, it may have been in voting and delegations. but they were definitely setting the stage for a civil war, which was warming up for about 15 years before it actually broke out, with openly saying we will not accept a new slave state. Any slave state that's added has to be a free slave state, and we will not allow slavery even in the South. They did do other things along the way, like the returning of refugees. That is true. It's also true that when Abraham Lincoln did free the slaves, he only freed the Southern slaves, which broke off, so it didn't really matter at that point. And he allowed, I think it was Missouri, the northern slave state, to keep their slaves for about a year and a half. So these are all true and twisting parts of history. That doesn't take away from the central theme that a war was fought over slavery.
It's weird to me.
The declarations of specific.
Wait, Marshall, I want to make a point. Wait, I want to respond to Mayor. I want to hear you too, but I just want to finish my point there. So the bizarreness of this idea that the war, I'm trying to see what is the intellectual upside. What is the benefit of making this irrational argument that the North went to war with the South to keep them in the Union, and that Lincoln said, if I could have preserved the Union and not abolished slavery, I would have. How did that even work? Can anybody explain it to me? Like, so the South secedes.
Do you need me to explain, like, antebellum America in the 1830s or the 40s?
No, I just want to know what that phrase means to somebody who's trying to make the argument that Lincoln was not against slavery. So Lincoln said,
Lincoln was saying was,
I don't think,
could
in all
avoid
fairness,
war.
I don't think that's a faithful way to portray Lincoln. Neither of those extremes.
it's not.
Hold on. Neither of those extremes fit his personality. George Kearns Goodwin in The Bully Pulpit, not The Bully Pulpit, Team of Rivals, very good book about Lincoln and his cabinet, was quite clear about Lincoln's view. Lincoln, while he campaigned against slavery as a governance thing, he believed he should do and abide by the Great Compromise in like the early to late 1830s with Calhoun and a couple of other folks. There's also the lead up in the civil in Congress, starting in the early 1850s, which have roots in Andrew Jackson's administration, about Southerners, let me say it, about Southerners picking duels with Northerners, and the South was a more honor-based rather than the North. And so the Northern senators always backed down. Starting in mid to early 1852, they started to, in Congress, get irritated and angry with the colleagues who challenged them to duels. You then have the publishing of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Wait, are you on the slavery thing, Bill?
Yes.
How would you? I'm trying to find.
Just let me get there.
Okay.
It's like a can opener, and it takes up the abolitionist sentiment in the Northeast, particularly voiced by William Lloyd Garrison, out and made it more popular. Well, at the same time, that book helped as an American story to move the discussion of slavery from the late 1830s and 1840s from a discussion about the economy to a discussion about morality. So you start in the early 1850s with this 1853 with this morality piece. Then the Senate and the House go from taking cans, and Norm, maybe you heard this, Sam Houston knocked the guy over the head in the late 1830s or early 1840s. And he was told,
Okay,
not to
let's
do it.
detail.
These guys then took the canes and started beating each other, and then they brought canes and knives, and then they brought canes, knives, and pistols, and then it was knives and pistols, and then it was just pistols. And this is a large procession that leads from 1853 all the way up to the initiation of the Civil War in 1861. At the time the Southern delegates decided to break away, it is clear from the Lincoln-Douglas debates that Lincoln, to the South's understanding, was going to take slavery away, despite statements that, no, if I don't really have to do that, I'm not going to do that. So in the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln was not on the ballot in at least 6 to 7 Southern states. The Declarations of Secession, in the first paragraph, state that they are leaving the Union to preserve slavery in perpetuity. Now, it's important to note that in the Old South, there were 3 classes. as William Seward observed in his study in 1853 with his wife in the South, there were enslaved Africans, there were poor whites, and there were rich whites. The poor whites, or the rich whites, wrote the secessions. The poor whites then were drafted in to the Confederate Army, and the black slaves were then used as mules and later in the Civil War as troops. The point is being, Lincoln's chief issue was preserving the integrity of the Union, right? That was his job. But to do all of that, to become the emancipation guy that signs the Emancipation Proclamation, gets rid of slaves in the South, you have all of that that leads up to it. Now, I realize it's probably lengthy explanation, but there's more info, but I'll just leave it there. If you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Well, I mean, Lincoln had two jobs and two goals and two competing goods that he had to navigate, that he had to fulfill. It was now, it's interesting that you brought in a lot of detail. Each detail could be a chapter in a book. Example, the move from, or the coexistence of the moral argument and the economic argument.
But
I'm not sure.
To the central point for a moment.
Okay, yeah.
When Lincoln said, if I could preserve the Union and preserve slavery, I would. So he said that he's more important in preserving the Union than slavery, than abolishing slavery. You can say that a lot on his character, whatever. That's like this idea of judging like individuals. But what you cannot take away from the fact is he couldn't do it because the North were no longer allowing slavery even in the southern states. So the North went to war because they abolished slavery. They could have elected a president that wasn't going to abolish slavery. They could have sent a petition to Lincoln and said, "We will not fight for this. Just let them have slavery." It was most definitely a war that was over quote unquote state rights, but it was the right to own slaves. There's no other way to frame it.
Well, they don't even claim states' rights in the secession documents. They claim
the North.
The North
Right.
they were abused.
It was to preserve the Union.
Yeah. The South was specifically and intentionally to preserve slavery. One of the weird things about it, or at least I think is weird, is that aside from North Carolina's, every statement of secession names the issue of slavery in the very first sentence of the second paragraph, from what I recall. And it is remarkably interesting that they're like that. And then you consider the Confederate Constitution, in particular, something known as Article 9. I'm quoting that having read that 2 years ago. So there may be some fuzziness there, but the point remains the same.
And again, this was just simply a way of biasly trying to say that the federal government and central authority and more control and bigger government is better. And it is true that the federal government stepped in and protected many rights in the South that would not have been there without the federal government. But that's only because the northern states pushed for it. I said this a few times, but I really think it's worth repeating. A centralized government and a one authority that you can get control of that one and manipulate it how you want is an extremely dangerous system. Our democracy that has been like so precious for so many years is because we have so many competing interests in both today in the Senate and the House and in England in the Parliament. It would not happen if you allow one totalitarian king to control.
Yeah, I mean that I largely agree with. I think that's probably true.
What point is somebody trying to make, though? I hear this point a lot on this app, that Lincoln was not really against slavery. I mean, slavery was not sustainable either economically or morally, and the economic and moral basis of the United States was what sustained it and what helped it to grow and increase in power and wealth.
America. It's trying to say that America is the only, well, England did too, but Caucasians are the only ones willingly free their slaves on a moral basis. It was economic there too, so let's not like pretend that it's all moral. But the only people that had chattel slavery and were saying we're going to end it did come out of the West. This anti-West idea and pretending that slavery was born in the West and the transatlantic slave trade is the only slavery in history and blah, blah, blah. So they cannot give even Lincoln the glory of freeing the slaves. So they have to turn it into he didn't really, that's not really what happened. That's the revisionist of history that you're hearing on, yeah.
I don't think that's really I don't think that's really the point. I think one of the things we do with Lincoln and the other founders, and it's something I'm referring to is Dressman on, is put him on a bit of a pedestal when it shouldn't necessarily be. And what I mean by that was Lincoln was a devious man. He knew how to play dirty back in politics just like the best of them. It's the only way he would have been able to get shit done at that time in the United States. So why you're asking on why I think that's important to note, I think it's important to note because of his quite passionate stance on one end, mixed with intransigence and skepticism on the other for freeing slavery unless it would free the Union. He saw that, I think, as not just a moral good, but as a piece of strategy to preserve the Union. The point I'm trying to make here is we talk about Lincoln sometimes in an angelic fashion. Yeah, he was definitely one of my favorite presidents. Absolutely. But the idea that Lincoln was not a hard-boiled man of his day who didn't think about these kinds of things in a skeptical way, I have a hard time viewing that, which is why I don't like the super praise of the super bad. The truth is Lincoln is genuinely probably somewhere in the middle of that. But he had to do things to make it function. One of the worst was suspending habeas corpus. We still look at Lincoln as this transformative president because he genuinely did bring us to the formation and the start of the Second Union, right? A union in which we don't have slavery and we seek to we seek ourselves to a more perfect union. So I think looking at him as a deeply kind of flawed man who was there when he needed to be is, I think, a probably more truthful representation of his character. It takes his hardness for what it would have been at the time. At least I think so, anyway.
These weird revisions of history, I just find them so interesting that people are just like stamping their feet like little children with their fingers in their ears going, la, 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 la. And in order to rewrite history, it's like Maoist or something. And I'm just reading the chat here. So somebody said that there were more black folks than white folks in the country. And I'm like, yeah, black folks are, and that most folks came in the 20th century. And then I'm writing back, and black folks are what? They're 13.5% to 14% of the population. Again, which is good. May they live long and prosper, but this weird, like racialized revisionist history, I just find it puzzling. And maybe what you said is right, Mayor, that the whole point is nihilism. That, it's ethnic hate or racial hate or, didn't we hear that somebody wanted to take down the statue of Abraham Lincoln in Washington? We got very close to that. We went through such a weird period in our history. They took down the statue of Teddy Roosevelt from in front of the American Museum of Natural History. And then, they were attacking statues of Washington and Lincoln. Are we going to go back to that? I mean, is this what Kamala's offering? I'm so puzzled by this nihilism. I have to.
No, but like class issues tend to make appearances in countries like ours. That kind of stuff just. It seems that for countries like the one we have.
Ego, I'm going to start erasing your comments because they're dumb. And just come up and present your point of view because you're just sort of stating weird facts that people are calling people migrants and what you learned in history. Did you
He's
not?
the one who said he hates immigrants like Jason because he came here within the last 100 years.
So black folks are 50% of the population. So he's saying that there were more blacks in America. This is his comment. I wouldn't use that language. I don't even know what his ethnic group is. There are more blacks in America than all the white people combined. So, but they're 15%. So I got to know the math. Is it somebody so innumerate that they make statements like this, and then they're anti-immigrant or something? My heart is not. He says my heart is not American. So he thinks this kind of racism. This is not a forum for that kind of racism. Hating on immigrants, hating on white folks, hating on black folks. I don't know when you're like to this person who, in a very cowardly manner, calls himself Eagle Hawk Condor. I don't know what that's supposed to even mean. I don't know what position he has politically, but these screeds of hate. Immigrants are racist, and Poland and Israel and Nigeria. This is the most primitive kind of racialism and hate. I just don't get it. So I will say to the person who, I don't know what you think is American history. So either come up and make your point, because I'm sort of bored with your dumb posts, or I'm just going to ask you to leave the room, because I'm not going to have to go. No, you didn't make your point. He was writing in the chat. So you have your opportunity. Either come up and say what you think.
He can have a point if he thinks he made his point. So he should leave.
Right. And you're arguing over history. So I think he was trying to say that the Missouri, I don't know, he was trying to twist what happened with the Missouri Compromise. There's no dispute that was one of the things that triggered the Civil War. That the compromise, we let in one slave state and one non-slave state. Is that accurate, Marshall? And then he said that Marshall's history was wrong, which I also think is unfair. I don't think Marshall, but he doesn't correct him in any way. So now he's making personal attack. So now, next time you make a personal attack, I'm going to ask you. Go ahead, Mark.
I wonder if that had wires of the ear because of the size of the flag is
All right. Otherwise, let's move on, because
I just have no
these are.
respect for Chat Warrior. If you want to make a point, let him make your point, opposed to twisting things.
It's incomprehensible. I'm not sure what point he thought was made to ninth graders. So let's go to the other thing. So on the one hand, we have. Does anybody disagree that slavery is not economically sustainable, or much less morally sustainable?
It's not moral, but to say that it's not economically sustainable when you're forcing people into free labor, I mean, that is sustainable by definition.
I disagree. I exactly the opposite.
Not true.
Exactly the opposite.
Slave owners were using the slaves for economic reasons.
Well, so you guys are thinking in terms of today. Go back to ancient Rome where you had hundreds of slaves. It's a little different.
I'm thinking of America. I'm thinking of American history.
I'm thinking of terms of the continent. So, I'm talking about American history. So most slaves were being used as a luxury item, which you could say is not economically sustainable to the extent that it didn't bring in more income than it cost the slave owner.
Yeah, but you have to look at it as a plantation owner who goes to live in New York City but has estates in the South. What does he care if people live on his estate? They generate him economic,
Okay, I get to the audience so that you can respond.
Most slaves were not being used on the plantation earning money for the slave owner as free labor. That did happen, but that was not the majority. The harvest season is a short time of year. It was not the majority of slaves. The majority of slaves were a financial burden on the slave owner. They were a tremendous luxury item. Remember, we don't have electricity, we don't have running water. You want a slave to bring you warm water in the morning and heat it up. That's a tremendous luxury. It might cost you money, but if you can afford it. So although I agree that it's not economically sustainable, I don't agree that would have ended slavery in and of itself, because wealthy people would have continued to employ slaves for the luxury of owning the slave.
So, however many there were, and I understand we're about 1 billion, I'm just doing that from memory. If you take these people out of the economy, number one, they're not being productive, as you're suggesting, Mayor. But remember, we had the cotton gin finally. And number two, they're not participating in the economy, so they're not buying stuff. So they're neither producing anything at the peak of their ability, the way American workers are hopefully motivated to do, nor are they consuming, which also shrinks the economy. So that's the economic argument. The moral argument the idea of
economically good. My question is, and it's an open question, would economic alone have ended slavery, or would the wealthy that are exploiting their slave, even though it's costing them money, would they have continued to do it? Now, it could be the slave population would have shrunk, the reason that you're saying, and as electricity and running water and things like that, then it became less advantageous to have a slave. Like if you have a slave now that's your chauffeur, that would be much less benefit than having the things they had back then, like build your fire living. I mean, think about how many things we have that we take for granted that you needed manual labor to do. I don't have the answer to that, Mark, but I don't think that alone ended slavery for the reason you said.
Well, it exists in very elite circles to this day in some countries. I don't feel compelled to name the countries, but you would be surprised to learn that a kind of a servant system, which is really an enslavement system, persists to this day. As you suggest, that's a luxury in some countries. It's part of a social system, and it's present in more countries than people admit. So that's an argument in favor of what we said, that as a weird, primitive, feudal sort of, I guess you're calling it a luxury, as a social institution, it has continued in some ways.
Luxury distinguishing from a economic benefit. Like an employee is not a luxury, it's also getting money. A chauffeur is a luxury, I'm just splitting it that way. And I don't even think it's weird. I'm sorry to say that in most of human history, they exploited people. We're the ones that are different. We're the not. I'm glad it's not here. It happened for much of human history.
I know. I agree. For some reason, somebody seems stuck on the point that there were more enslaved people than there were non-enslaved people. It's even trying to make it could be very strange. In the South, probably.
It could be in certain states in certain areas of the South, definitely not across America. Not even close.
Well, I mean, I think here's another really uncomfortable point to discuss. Do we think that America is in its founding and in its DNA is quote unquote racist? Or do we feel like, as I feel, that the DNA of the country is anti-racist and serves to abolish this repugnant institution and make it possible for human flourishing? Do you guys have any feelings on that one? I mean, in a way,
It's dominating into someone else. It is. As I felt like it was dominating someone else.
I can't hear. I couldn't understand what you just said.
I said I felt like I was dominating, but someone else wanted to chime in.
Yeah.
America in its core has always been anti-racist. It hasn't always lived up to its own expectations. Like, if we didn't have the 13th or 14th Amendment, I would make the argument from the Constitution alone, in the amendments, that all men are created equal and slavery should be abolished. America didn't always live up to that, obviously, and then we had another 100 years of Jim Crow, so we know that it didn't always manifest itself the way it should have. But American values, stripped away from how they played out in history, have always been anti-racist.
So, I mean, is it, let's see, abolished it. Like England and the abolishment of slavery in England is continued. No, America now would like and slavery exists to this day in many places. There are many slaves all over the world.
Tried to abolish the slaves, and England said no and forced them not to. And then once there was independence, England did beat Virginia to it. But to say America was the last place to abolish slavery is so fundamentally untrue. I have written that language America did not do. Went across the seas and abolished slavery globally. So most of the places that abolished slavery after England did, it was because the English Navy went across the seas, stopping pirate ships from taking slaves and shutting down most of the slave trade around the globe.
And just to make a point, America abolished slavery before Africa. And slavery still exists in Africa. This is the argument. I mean, I don't know where this disinformation comes from.
I think another piece of evidence that America is sort of anti-racism and its ideals is the fact that after 1776, we abolished slavery. 89 years later, right? You look at any other countries, right? In the first 89 years, it's like, yeah, most of them aren't abolishing slavery that early. So I think people always want to say, look, America had slaves for 400 years. People being technical, right? Historically accurate. So it makes sense to start that number at this sort of the country, which was 1776. So in 89 years, we abolished slavery based on our ideals. So even if we're not looking to those ideals, it's like they actually say when we read them, it's like, sorry, you're not going to find a piece of racism in here at all. All these ideals that at the time were pretty radical that sort of laid the groundwork to eventually abolish slavery and create the country of America.
The two countries where slavery is worst and exists to this day are both black countries, Mauritania and Haiti. So the hypocrisy and the dishonesty, I find more than a little shocking. And again, I wonder why people would. It comes back, by the way, to this comes back, I think, to the battle between Trump and Kamala, and I think it comes back to the battle between different versions of reality and the what's the word I'm looking for? The destruction of me.
Okay, this is Trump Kennedy victory. I'm going to play for you the Kennedy and Trump speech with regards to their unification.
$76.
Hi, I'm Tim Walz, and I'm proud to be Kamala's pick for vice president. If we want to win in November, we need grassroots supporters like.
Well, as we head toward November tonight, NBC News is reporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. plans to end his campaign and endorse former President Donald Trump. NBC cites two sources who say the talks are ongoing, but there will be clarity by the end of the week. Both former President Trump and RFK Jr. have announced events in the Phoenix area for Friday.
Welcome to our viewers around the world and on PBS in America. This is a statement being given by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announcing his plans to join the presidential race.
I'm sorry to keep everybody waiting. 16 months ago, in April of 2023, I launched my campaign for President of the United States. I began this journey as a Democrat, the party of my father, my uncle, the party which I pledged my own allegiance to long before I was old enough to vote. I attended my first Democratic convention at the age of 6 in 1960. And back then, the Democrats were the champions of the Constitution, of civil rights. The Democrats stood against authoritarianism, against censorship, against colonialism, imperialism, and unjust wars. We were the party of labor, of the working class. The Democrats were the party of government transparency and the champion of the environment. Our party was the bulwark against big money interests and corporate power. True to its name, it was the party of democracy. As you know, I left that party in October because it had departed so dramatically from the core values that I grew up with. It had become the party of war, censorship, corruption, big pharma, big tech, big ag, and big money. When it abandoned democracy by canceling the primary to conceal the cognitive decline of the sitting president, I left the party to run as an independent. The mainstream of American politics and journalism derided my decision. Conventional wisdom said that it would be impossible even to get on the ballot as an independent because each state poses an insurmountable tangle of arbitrary rules for collecting signatures. I would need over 1 million signatures, something no presidential candidate in history had ever achieved. And then I'd need a team of attorneys and millions of dollars to handle all the legal challenges from the DNC. The naysayers told us that we were climbing a glass version of Mount Impossible. So the first thing I want to tell you is that we proved them wrong. We did it because beneath the radar of mainstream media organs, we inspired a massive independent political movement. More than 100,000 volunteers sprang into action, hopeful that they could reverse our nation's decline. Many worked 10-hour days, sometimes in blizzards and blazing heat. They sacrificed family time, personal commitments, and sleep month after month, energized by a shared vision of a nation healed of its divisions. They set up tables at churches and farmers markets. They canvassed door to door. In Utah and in New Hampshire, volunteers collected signatures in snowstorms, convincing each supporter to stop in the frigid cold, to take off their gloves, and to sign legibly. During a heat wave in Nevada, I met a tall, athletic volunteer who cheerfully told me that he had lost 25 pounds collecting signatures in 117-degree heat. To finance this effort, young Americans donated their lunch money, and senior citizens gave up part of their Social Security checks. Our 50-state organization collected those millions of signatures and more. No presidential campaign in American political history has ever done that. And so I want to thank all of those dedicated volunteers and congratulate the campaign staff who coordinated this enormous logistical feat. Your accomplishments were regarded as impossible. You carried me up that glass mountain. You pulled off a miracle. You achieved what all the pundits said could never be done. You have my deepest gratitude, and I'm never going to forget that. Not just for what you did for my campaign, but for the sacrifices you made because you love our country. You showed everyone that democracy is still possible here. It continues to survive in the press and in the idealistic human energies that still thrive beneath the canvas of neglect and of official and institutional corruption. Today, I'm here to tell you that I will not allow your efforts to go to waste. I'm here to tell you that I will leverage your tremendous accomplishments to serve the ideals that we share, the ideals of peace, of prosperity, of freedom, of health, all the ideals that motivated my campaign. I'm here today to describe the path forward that you've opened with your commitment and with your hard labors. Now, in an honest system, I believe that I would have won the election. In a system the like kind that my father and my uncles thrived in, a system with open debates, with fair primaries, with regularly scheduled debates, with fair primaries, and with a truly independent media untainted by government propaganda and censorship. In a system of nonpartisan courts and election boards, everything would be different. After all, the polls consistently showed me beating each of the other candidates, both in favorability and also in head-to-head matchups. But I'm sorry to say that while democracy may still be alive at the grassroots, it has become little more than a slogan for our political institutions, for our media, and for our government, and most sadly at all for me, for the Democratic Party. In the name of saving democracy, the Democratic Party set itself to dismantling it, lacking confidence in its candidate, that its candidate could win in a fair election at the voting booth. The DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself. Each time that our volunteers turned in those towering boxes of signatures needed to get on the ballot, the DNC dragged us into court, state after state, attempting to erase their work and to subvert the will of the voters who had signed those petitions. It deployed DNC-aligned judges to throw me and other candidates off the ballot and to throw President Trump in jail. It ran a sham primary that was rigged to prevent any serious challenge to President Biden. Then, when a predictably bungled debate performance precipitated the palace coup against President Biden, the same shadowy DNC operatives appointed his successor, also without an election. They installed a candidate who was so unpopular with voters that she dropped out in 2020 without winning a single delegate. My uncle and my father both relished debate. They prided themselves on their capacity to go toe-to-toe with any opponent in the battle over ideas. They would be astonished to learn of a Democratic Party presidential nominee who, like Vice President Harris, has not appeared in a single interview or an unscripted encounter with voters for 35 days. This is profoundly undemocratic. How are people to choose when they don't know whom they are choosing? And how can this look to the rest of the world? My father and my uncle were always conscious of America's image abroad because of our nation's role as the template for democracy, the role model for democratic processes, and the leader of the free world. Instead of showing us her substance and character, the DNC and its media organs engineered a surge of popularity for Vice President Harris based upon, well, nothing. No policies, no interviews, no debates, only smoke and mirrors and balloons in a highly produced Chicago circus. There in Chicago, a string of Democratic speakers mentioned Donald Trump 147 times just on the first day. Oh, who needs a policy when you have Trump to hate? In contrast, at the RNC convention, President Biden was mentioned only twice in 4 days. I do interviews every day. Many of you have interviewed me. Anybody who asks gets to interview me. Some days I do as many as 10. President Trump, who actually was nominated and won an election, also does interviews daily. How did the Democratic Party choose a candidate that has never done an interview or debate during the entire election cycle? We know the answers. They did it by weaponizing the government agencies. They did it by abandoning democracy. They did it by suing the opposition and by disenfranchising American voters. What most alarms me isn't how the Democratic Party conducts its internal affairs or runs its candidates. What alarms me is the resort to censorship and media control and the weaponization of the federal agencies. When a U.S. president colludes with or outright coerces media companies to censor political speech, it's an attack on our most sacred right of free expression, and that's the very right upon which all of our other constitutional rights rest. President Biden mocked Vladimir Putin's 88% landslide in the Russian elections, observing that Putin and his party controlled the Russian press, and that Putin prevented serious opponents from appearing on the ballot. But here in America, the DNC also prevented opponents from appearing on the ballot. And our television networks expose themselves as Democratic Party organs. Over the course of more than a year, in a campaign where my poll numbers reached at times in the high 20s, the DNC-aligned mainstream media networks maintain a near perfect embargo on interviews with me. During his 10-month presidential campaign in 1992, Ross Perot gave 34 interviews on mainstream networks. In contrast, during the 16 months since I declared, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN combined gave only 2 live interviews from me. Those networks instead ran a continuous deluge of hit pieces with inaccurate, often vile, pejoratives and defamatory smears. Some of those same networks and colluded with the DNC to keep me off the debate stage. Representatives of those networks are in this room right now, and I'll just take a moment to ask you to consider the many ways that your institutions have abdicated this really sacred responsibility, the duty of a free press to safeguard democracy and to challenge always the party in power. Instead of maintaining that posture of fierce skepticism toward authority, your institutions have made themselves government mouthpieces and stenographers for the organs of power. You didn't alone cause the devolution of American democracy, but you could have prevented it. The Democratic Party's censorship of social media was even more of a naked exercise of executive power. This week, a federal judge, Terry Doty, upheld my injunction against President Biden, calling the White House's censorship project, quote, the most egregious violation of the First Amendment in the history of the United States of America. Doty's previous 155-page decision details how just 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution, President Biden and his White House opened up a portal and then invited the CIA, the FBI, CISA, which is a censorship agency. It's the center of the censorship industrial complex, DHS, the IRS, and other agencies to censor me and other political dissidents on social media.
Iran is at the center of a global terrorist network. Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, a global jihad against America.
Even today, users who try to Post my campaign videos to Facebook or YouTube, get messages that this content violates community standards. 2 days after Judge Doty rendered his decision this week, Facebook was still attaching warning labels to an online petition calling on ABC to include me in the upcoming debate. They said that violates community standards, their community standards. The mainstream media was once the guardian of the First Amendment and democratic principles, and it's joined this systemic attack on democracy. It also, the media justifies their censorship on the grounds of combating misinformation, but governments and oppressors don't censor lies. They don't fear lies. They fear the truth, and that's what they censor. And I don't want any of this to sound like a personal complaint, because it's not. For me, it's all part of a journey, and it's a journey that I signed up with. But I need to make these observations because I think they're critical for us doing the thing that we need to do as citizens in a democracy to assess where we are in this country and what our democracy still looks like, and the assumptions about U.S. leadership around the globe. And are we living up? Are we really still a role model for democracy in this country? Or have we made it, a kind of a joke? And here's the good news. While mainstream outlets denied me a critical platform, they didn't shut down my ideas, which have especially flourished among young voters and independent voters, thanks to the alternative media. Many months ago, I promised the American people that I would withdraw from the race if I became a spoiler. A spoiler is someone. Will alter the outcome of the election, but has no chance of winning. In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory in the face of this relentless systematic censorship and media control. So I cannot in good conscience ask my staff and volunteers to keep working their long hours or ask my donors to keep giving when I cannot honestly tell them that I have a real path to the White House. Furthermore, our polling consistently showed that by staying on the ballot in the battleground states, I would likely hand the election over to the Democrats, with whom I disagree on the most existential issues: censorship, war, and chronic disease. Oh, I want everyone to know that I am not terminating my campaign. I am simply suspending it and not ending it. My name, my name will remain on the ballot in most states. If you live in a blue state, you can vote for me without harming or helping President Trump or Vice President Harris. In red states, the same will apply. I encourage you to vote for me. And if enough of you do vote for me, and neither of the major party candidates win 270 votes, which is quite possible, in fact, today our polling shows them tying at 269 to 269, and I could conceivably still end up in the White House in a contingent election. But in about 10 battleground states where my presence would be a spoiler, I'm going to remove my name, and I've already started that process and urge voters not to vote for me. It's with a sense of victory and not defeat that I'm suspending my campaign activities. Not only did we do the impossible by collecting 1 million signatures, we changed the national political conversation forever. Chronic disease, free speech, government corruption, breaking our addiction to war have moved to the center of politics. I can say to all who have worked so hard the last year and a half, thank you for a job well done. 3 great causes drove me to enter this race in the first place, primarily. And these are the principal causes that persuaded me to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent. And now to throw my support to President Trump. The causes were free speech, a war in Ukraine, and the war on our...
When I told Trump about this, he urged me to get this message out to as many true patriots as I can.
Children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles. with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification like they do on every war, that this one is a noble effort to stop a supervillain, Vladimir Putin, from invading the Ukraine and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle initiated by the ambitions of the U.S. neocons for American global hegemony. I'm not excusing Putin for invading Ukraine. He had other options. But the war is Russia's predictable response to the reckless neocon.
Or I hope you're enjoying this. I'm creating clips and putting this on YouTube. I hope you enjoy.
Project of extending NATO to encircle Russia, a hostile act. The credulous media rarely explain to Americans that we unilaterally walked away from 2 intermediate nuclear weapons treaties with Russia and then put nuclear-ready Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland. This is a hostile act. And that the Biden White House repeatedly spurned Russia's offer to settle this war peacefully. The Ukraine war began in 2014 when U.S. agencies overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and installed a hand-picked pro-Western government that launched a deadly civil war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. In 2019, America walked away from a peace treaty, the Minsk Agreement, that had been negotiated between Russia and Ukraine by European nations. And then in April, of 2022, we wanted the war. In April of 2022, President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine to force President Zelensky to tear up a peace agreement that he and the Russians had already signed, and the Russians were withdrawing troops from Kiev and Donbass and Lugansk. And that peace agreement would have brought peace to the region and would have allowed Donbass and Lugansk to remain part of Ukraine. President Biden stated that month that his objective in the war was regime change in Russia. His Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin simultaneously explained that America's purpose in the war was to exhaust the Russian army, to degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. These objectives, of course, have nothing to do with what they were telling Americans about protecting Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine is a victim in this war, and it's a victim of the West. Since then, of Russia and both Russia and the West, since then, we have, since tearing up that agreement, forcing Zelensky to tear up the agreement, we've squandered the flower of Ukrainian youth, as many as 600,000 Ukrainian kids, and over 100,000 Russian kids, all of whom we should be mourning, have died, and the Ukraine's infrastructure is destroyed. The war has been a disaster for our country as well. We squandered nearly $200 billion already, and these are badly needed dollars in our communities, suffering communities all over our country. The Nord Stream pipeline sabotage and the sanctions have destroyed Europe's industrial base, which formed the bulwark of U.S. national security. A strong Germany with a strong industry is a much stronger deterrent to Russia, and a German. That is deindustrialized and turned into just an extension of the U.S. military base. We pushed Russia into a disastrous alliance with China and Iran. We're closer to the brink of nuclear exchange than at any time since 1962. And the neocons in the White House don't seem to care at all. Our moral authority and our economy are in shambles, and the war gave rise to the emergence of BRICS, which now threatens to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. This is a first-class calamity for our country. Judging by her bellicose, belligerent speech last night in Chicago, we can assume that President Harris will be an enthusiastic advocate for this and other neocon military adventures. And President Trump says that he will reopen negotiations with President Putin and end the war overnight if soon as he becomes president. This alone would justify my support for his campaign. Last summer, it looked like no candidate was willing to negotiate a quick end to the Ukraine war, to tackle chronic disease epidemic, to protect free speech, our constitutional freedoms, to clean corporate influence out of our government, or to defy the neocons and their agenda of endless military adventurism. But now one of the two candidates has adopted these issues as his own, to the point where he has asked to enlist me in his administration. I'm speaking, of course, of Donald Trump. Less than 2 hours after President Trump narrowly escaped assassination, Callie Means called me on my cell phone. I was then in Las Vegas. Callie is arguably the leading advocate for food safety, for soil regeneration, and for ending the chronic disease epidemic. That is destroying America's health and ruining our economy. Callie has exposed the insidious corruption at the FDA, the NIH, the HHS, and the USDA that has caused the epidemic. Callie had been working on and off for my campaign, advising me on those subjects since the beginning. And those subjects have been my primary focus for the last 20 years. I was delighted when Callie told me that day that he had also been advising President Trump. He told me President Trump was anxious to talk to me about chronic disease and other subjects, and to explore avenues of cooperation. He asked if I would take a call from the president. President Trump telephoned me a few minutes later, and I met with him the following day. A few weeks later, I met again with President Trump and his family members and close advisors in Florida. In a series of long, intense discussions, I was surprised to discover that we are aligned on many key issues. In those meetings, he suggested that we join forces as a unity party. We talked about Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. That arrangement would allow us to disagree publicly and privately and fiercely, if need be, on issues over which we differ, while working together on the existential issues upon which we are in concordance. I was a ferocious critic of many of the policies during his first administration, and there are still issues and approaches upon which we continue to have very serious differences. But we are aligned with each other on other key issues like ending the forever wars, ending the childhood disease epidemics, securing the border. Protecting freedom of speech, unraveling the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, getting the U.S. intelligence agencies out of the business of propagandizing and censoring and surveilling Americans and interfering with our elections. Following my first discussion with President Trump, I tried unsuccessfully to open similar discussions with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris declined to meet or even to speak with me. Suspending my candidacy is a heart-rending decision for me, but I'm convinced that it's the best hope.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe.